that right? Right, good evening. Thank you very much for coming along this blowy evening. It's a good evening here in Brora. Welcome to our chat about crofting. We want to inform you of a few things, such as annual notice and duties, and maybe get a bit of feedback from you as well as the evening goes on, once I give a wee presentation here about various things about crofting policy and how you could give us suggestions how that could perhaps change. There's lots of subjects about crofting that give rise to questions and conversations, and as an organisation we want to be visible and we want to be informative as well, but we can't be informative unless we get a bit of feedback from yourselves. So tonight I'm joined by three colleagues actually. To my left here is Donald MacDonald. Donald's a fellow board member of the organisation. He's an active Caithness crofter. Not that there's anything other than things in Caithness, they're all active crofters, but Donald's one of the most active. Donald runs a long-established agricultural and landscaping business. He's an author as well. I think you're working on your second book. Yep. Breeder of sheepdogs, and he likes a game of football when he's got time. Over here, Gary Campbell. Gary is our chief executive. And prior to that, he held several senior appointments at the University of the Highlands and Islands. Gary's a chartered accountant by profession. He's from Argyll. Don't hold that against him. But he was brought up in the family croft, so he has a real affinity with crofting from an early age. He's lived in Inverness for over 30 years, and he's held various senior management, sales and finance roles in the private, academic and public sectors during that time. And he's also the vice chair of the Inverness Harbour Trust. We've also got Kirstine here. Kirstine is our media specialist. And Kirstine has, for her sins, she offered to screen this and host this meeting live on Facebook. So whatever you say, whatever you do, you're going to be recorded forever. So it's now live, Kirstine, isn't it, on Facebook? So, right, I better watch what I'm saying myself. I'm Rod MacKenzie. I'm an active crofter as well. I worked 40 years as an auctioneer through the crofting counties, and this has given me a real appreciation and understanding of the vast diversity of land types, livestock, breeds and human cultures that exist within crofting. I was also the secretary and the organiser of the Black Isle Show for 14 years, so that also gave me an appreciation of working with the public. So, the main purpose tonight is to reinforce the importance of the statutory crofting annual notice and crofting duties. And I think we'll go to the first slide, Kirstine, please. Can you ping it on both? Sort of better. Yeah. I want to speak briefly to a few slides about the annual notice and duties and some strategic policy work that the Commission Board are currently working on. And Gary will then speak to the operational work that will follow, hopefully, as a result. So I'll go to the next one, Kirstine, please. So just to set the scene, the board structure of the Commission. The board of the Crofting Commission is made up of 9 members. We are 2 here. I represent the East Highlands constituency, where we are at the moment, and Donnie represents Caithness and Orkney. Elected members like ourselves serve a 5-year term, and the current term started in March 22 and ends in March 27. In addition, there's 3 board members who are appointed by the Scottish Government, and they fill any skills gap. Not that there's a lot of skills gap between us, Donnie, and the rest of us, but skills gap as in accountancy, governance, and such like. And their appointment is usually between 3 and 5 years. And the staggering of appointment dates and terms, it leads to a chance of more continuity instead of a whole board turning over at one time. The board's main work is to concentrate on strategic objectives and the issues, while Gary, along with his staff, they're responsible for the operational issues and the day-to-day running. And Gary leads and directs the staff, and Gary's responsible to the board. So the next slide, please, Kirstine. So in 2025, the board agreed 3 distinct strategic priorities. First of all, regulatory turnaround times and efficiencies. duties enforcement and the annual notice, and policy modernisation. And over the next 3 slides, I will outline those in a wee bit more detail. Please, Kirsty. So, since this board was elected in March 22, the main priority was to decrease the backlog of regulatory applications. And we had quite a backlog at the time, and that led to quite a few complaints. So the results are as shown there. Assignation, we were running at 20 weeks to sort out an assignation, and it's down now to an average, a median of 7 weeks. And interestingly enough, 99% of assignation applications are approved. House site and ground decrofting from 23 weeks down to 9 weeks. And part croft decrofting, 27 weeks down to 14 weeks. So that's been a huge turnaround, and credit to the board and Gary and his staff as well for decreasing that. Further efficiencies are planned, but we're probably at a level now that we can't really slash these because there are statutory notice periods to be adhered to. So we're probably not going to slash that very much more. But this could be aided by the passing of the new Crofting Bill, which is nearly it's at stage 3, and we hope it will get royal assent sometime during the summer. So there are a few efficiency savings within that have been suggested by crofters, MSPs, and loads of other people. So it will hopefully bring some efficiencies when it comes into being. And also, there's a new IT system being scoped out at the moment. So that scoping out has started. So the next one, please, Kirstine. So, the 3 crofting duties. So, residency, very, very specific, to reside within 20 miles, 32 kilometres of the croft. And the reason for this, it helps to maintain population, especially in the Highlands and Islands, and very, very, very remote locations. To cultivate, maintain, and put to purposeful use. Absolutely important, because it makes the most of our most abundant naturally occurring resource, our land. We're not making any more of it, and there's less and less every year with housing developments, commercial developments, so very, very important to look after the land that we have under our stewardship. Not to neglect or misuse. It leads to dereliction and abandonment. It's unproductive, noxious weeds encroach, and it's unsightly. The next one, please. So, why focus on duties? Well, they're probably the most prescriptive part of the Crofting Acts. The legislation that gives crofters exceptionally strong rights. It's a unique form of land tenure, and it is the envy of many countries throughout Europe and the world, I suppose. And I suppose many conflicts have started, such as in Skye 1886, when crofting rights were established. And this was because of a lack of tenants or occupiers' rights. However, with strong rights should come stringent responsibilities. And that's why the 3 duties remain. Despite this, we seem to have a significant alleged level of absenteeism and neglect. And for such an envied and respected system of land tenure, it can undermine public confidence in crofting tenure. The next one, please. So the annual notice. The annual notice effectively is the 4th crofting duty, but arguably the most important one. So how do we tackle duties? Well, the best tool the Commission has in its toolbox is the statutory annual notice, formerly known as the census. So, the annual notice, as you know as crofters, it asks you 3 questions. And if any of the questions are any one or more of, I'm not residing within 20 miles, or I'm not cultivating my croft, or I am misusing or neglecting my croft, the Commission will make contact and inquire as to why. Non-return can result in a fine of £200, and it's very simple to return digitally. A lot of people were very frightened off by getting an A4 piece of paper with a QR code on it. So we've set up, over the past few months since it came into being, a dedicated team in Great Glen House. So if you're frightened of it at all, this QR code, you don't want to go on a computer, you can phone up, and our staff will ask you these 3 questions, record it against you, and tell you that your notice has been submitted. So very, very simple. So the next one, please. So the purpose. Well, we need to know. So it enables Gary and his staff to monitor adherence to the 3 duties and to act. And believe me, I think when Gary speaks, you'll see that he's serious about acting. Not on the stage, but taking action. It only works if everybody returns the notice and answers truthfully. And currently, the last year, there was a 75% return rate. So it's not the 75% that come back that we're worried about, or what goes on it. We need to know about the other 25%. It's just a black hole. We don't know. Are they neglecting to return it? Or do people not want to return it because they're not compliant with duties? We need to know. Now, if you're not compliant, or folk aren't compliant with their duties, we can actually help. There are ways we can help by, if you can't reside in your croft, we can offer you the chance to apply for a sublet or a short-term consent to be absent, but we would want to know a long-term plan. If it's submitted untruthfully, such as the address of the correspondence and the croft address seem to be over 20 miles apart, then Gary and his team will be asking questions. And there's many correspondence addresses in far-flung locations, and I think it's been bandied about, there's 70 odd that are out with the UK. New Zealand, France, South Africa, and so on. So I think Gary's going to start there, and he's going to pull the net in. The next slide, please. So, why does it matter? Crofting's a form of land tenure. It's regulated at the expense of the public purse and in the public interest. So the Crofting Commission are scrutinised by Scottish Government, who hand us the money to operate. So they want to know how effective crofting tenure is and the crofting annual notice. It's important because 10% of the total landmass of Scotland is in crofting tenure. That's three quarters of a million hectares, nearly 2 million acres. So that's quite a significant chunk of Scotland. And it aids and ensures population retention. It sustains fragile communities and crofting areas. As we know, there's loads of areas that wouldn't have such a population if it wasn't for crofting. A lot of things hang on crofting. And crofters who fail to live locally, they fail to cultivate and maintain, misuse and neglect, they threaten that very system. So, they threaten local communities, as many remote communities, they really rely on crofting output. So, number 11, next one please. So the last and third of the strategic priorities. No, I think we're back on our way. We jump one. That's okay, don't worry. Policy modernisation. So that was the third priority, that the strategic priority that the board agreed. Policy modernisation. So where the law is clear, very, very clear, black and white, very seldom it is, such as in duties, then there's little doubt as to interpretation. And to quote one of my fellow commissioners, Colin Kennedy, he very often says that policy does not override clear language in law, but good, concise policy can be a great help where law does not provide such clear language. And surprise, surprise, there are quite a few areas in crofting law where this is the case. So the board, we've embarked on a programme of scoping discussions. We're halfway through at the moment, various things, assignations, short-term lets, and all the various aspects of crofting. And that will result in very much clearer regulatory decision making. We'll become more transparent, decisive and consistent when making these decisions. And it will allow for more delegation of decision making down to staff, and it will help applicants and staff when they're making their applications. It'll be a more known system. And we'll go on to the next one, please. So, like Donnie, I'm a very active and like to see a croft used. So I decided to put this slide in to highlight what active, resident, good practice and purposeful crofting contributes. So having worked in the mart for nearly 40 years, I contacted some of my former employers, and they were throughout Scotland, and they operate marts in crofting areas. There were various surveys, Scottish Government and Commission in past years, but livestock's still the main activity, and but it has declined. In a recent survey done by the Commission, I think about 4 years ago, 78% of croft activity was livestock. So, as I said, I contacted livestock marts, And it's estimated in excess of £50 million last year was sold through auction marts in the Crofting counties. In addition, not quantified at all, but diversified activities include Croftgate, produce and retailing. We don't know what that comes to because there's nobody keeping tally on it. Tourism, the North Coast 500, fantastic scenery, due to active crofting and good land stewardship. Forestry, many more croft and small-scale forestry schemes than before. Biodiversity, very, very difficult to quantify in money terms, but loads of crofts have been protecting fragile ecosystems for decades and not even been calculated. Carbon neutrality. A lot of crofts are low input, low intensity, so they must feed in. I would think they will feed into carbon neutrality. So all this activity, especially the economic activity, it returns between 10 and 15 times into the Scottish economy, which makes more than £500 million into the Scottish economy. So crofting does contribute. And the next one, please. So I stuck this in just last night, and I wanted to relate an anecdote that we had a meeting in Dingwall. There was over 70 people in Dingwall. So it was about purposeful use. Now, purposeful use could be just about anything. There's not a list of purposeful uses, and conversely, there's not a list of non-purposeful uses. But what's definitely not a purposeful use is non-usage. So, as I said, we had a meeting in Dingwall, great turnout, 70 people, and the anecdote goes something like, there was a lady in the audience who was quite derisory about a woman in Harris with a 6-acre croft. And her point was that she didn't want anybody to graze sheep, but she sells cream for menopausal women. And she thought that was just a terrible slur on a croft. So I hadn't been armed with any ammunition that night, but I did look, and I googled the lady's website, the lady in Harris, not the lady in Dingwall, and her Facebook page, and she's an apothecarist. She sells loads of tonics and creams in Claridge's, Beaverbrook Spa. I've never shopped there myself, but never mind, I might do. 50 Michelin star restaurants, including one that Heston Blumenthal has. And she's also a local employer. She employs 8 people part-time. So, is that purposeful use? Maybe doesn't want to keep sheep. It's maybe more profitable to make her creams. So, a brief search of the internet and searching #crofting, you get everything that has something to do with crofting. And it yielded loads of croft-based enterprises. And just to list a few: tourism and accommodation, campsites, pods, shepherds' huts, bothies, etc. Food and drink, meat boxes, veg boxes, baking, honey, pizzas, tonics. Crafts and retail, Harris tweed, candles, spinning, knitwear, sheepskins, basket making, apothecary. Education, training and mentoring. There's one up in Lairg. I don't know, Cara Cameron's not here tonight, but there's an education centre up in Lairg, started on a croft. And renewable energy, loads of small-scale solar and wind energy applications. So, the next one, and I'll just run through this, and I'll let Gary speak to the next. So, I'll just give you a brief outline of the next steps, which Gary's going to expand on. So, the annual notice, it was issued on the 6th of January, as you know. It closes on the 6th of April. And we've had a major publicity campaign thanks to Kirstine, through social media, these kind of meetings, all over the Crofting counties. And the warnings have been issued re fraudulent returns. And we will take action to relet crofts of non-returners. And we'll work with those, as I said before, we'll work with those in breach of duty to resolve. There are ways you can resolve it. But ultimately, if somebody's not going to come back to their croft within a few years, we'll be asking them to take some long-term action. But we have limited resources. So we want to create a cultural change, actually, within crofting. We want to make sure that anybody who's not using a croft or misusing it, that they will do something. They will take a voluntary step themselves to do something. So I'll hand over to Gary now to say what his next steps are. That's the board's strategic view on it. And Gary, now yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. Just to elaborate on a couple of bits of this. So my job is to actually do the work that the government asks us to do. And it's a difficult position at times for me because I go around all the Crofting counties speaking to people like yourselves, and folk get sometimes rightly annoyed and upset about how the legislation's been drawn up. It's like, well, what happens if I live 25 miles away from a croft? What do you do then? And unfortunately it's prescriptive, and the position I'm in as a government employee is that the law is the way it is, and then we've got to enforce it. But I think that from the perspective of the next steps from us is we really need your help. And as Rod said, we don't have huge resources. We're not a police force. And also our colleagues at the Rural Payments Inspectorate Division, ARPID, who do work for us, they'll go and inspect various things that we ask for. Their resources have been cut as well. So to get to a point where everybody's using their crofts in the way that it's meant to be in the legislation, and that people are all living in the areas, which has been proven, as Rod said, clearly proven, both in economic studies and academic studies, to really boost the economy of the Highlands and Islands. We need crofters to come with us and actually undertake their duties and take it seriously, and do things like formalise informal lets and such like. Because if you don't, I've got no option but to act. And this is the thing that can be difficult, especially when people have got extenuating circumstances. We do take account of them. So if somebody, for example, they want to sublet their croft, we ask them why. They say, it's going to go to my son, my daughter, but they're going off to education, but they'll be back. They're away for 4 years. That's fine, that's fair enough. But if somebody says, well, I've inherited a croft from my aunt, and I live in the south of England, and I want to sublet the croft, but I might retire to Rogart in 20 years' time. That's no use. You know, we can't really look at that. So from my perspective, it's an ask really to say, could you come with us in this journey, and could you help us? As Rod said, 25% of the annual notices weren't returned last year. We wrote last summer to the 3,500 people who were part of that. A lot of people didn't realise that it's a crime. It's actually a criminal offence not to fill it in. So potentially we could report you to Procurator Fiscal, and potentially you get a fine, but more worryingly you'd get a criminal record. Now that's never been done in the past, but I'm getting pressure from the Scottish Government because they're saying, well, if there's all these crofts that people aren't telling you what's going on, we can only assume that these crofts are vacant and there's nobody on them. We can only assume that. And therefore you, the Crofting Commission, must do something about it, do duties enforcement, and if necessary, put people onto these crofts. And that works for both tenanted crofts and owner-occupier crofts. So I'll just leave you one last message. Please, if you haven't filled in the annual notice this year, please do it. It makes things more straightforward. Fill it in truthfully. If you're not meeting some of the duties, tell us. We don't go and throw you off immediately. We sit down, and the first thing is to say, how can we work this out and what can we do to fix it? And then we can all help solve the problems. I've been told, I've been doing this job for just over 2 years, and when I joined, everywhere I went, people said, what are you going to do about all these folk that aren't living here and have abandoned these crofts for decades? Well, this is what we're doing. But what we need is you guys that are here tonight, who clearly have an interest in crofting in this part of the world. We need your help to make it work as well. We'll go into we've got another couple of slides. There's just a couple of things I want to show you. You didn't, it's not on it. No, it's fine. So, okay, so what we'll do is we'll move to a Q&A session. Myself and Donnie and Rod here will take questions. Ask anything you want. We'll try and answer it as truthfully as possible, and we'll try and give you the information you need. If you don't want to ask something in public, especially given the fact that this has been broadcast live on the web, please come to us afterwards. Or if you want to drop me an email, ask me for my card, and you can drop me an email afterwards, and I'll take on any questions you've got if you don't want to do it publicly. But thanks very much. I'm delighted so many of you turned out here tonight. It's a real show of force for crofting in this part of the world, and then we'll go on and take some questions just now. Thanks.
We've actually had a question about people wondering why they have to fill in an annual notice if they've only got a grazing share. Do they still have to do it, or is it a mistake?
No, you still have to do it. If you've just got a grazing share that's been detached from a croft, it's actually called a deemed croft. The only way in legislation of dealing with it is to treat it as a croft in its own right. So we will ask you on the annual notice to fill it in. We ask about residency, the other bits we don't ask about. And what we're looking for is people who have inherited grazing shares that are not in the area. And then we can actually look to work with them to get that grazing share working for the common grazing in that area. That's why.
Yeah. And I suppose there would be a lot of people who have inherited grazing shares and don't know they have them, perhaps. And this has happened because a croft has been sold, especially an owner-occupied croft. Somebody's exercised their right to buy, and they've got the croft owner-occupied, and they maybe sell it, and they don't realise that the grazing share shouldn't go with it. It's not that it should go with it, but it could go with it. So they've just become departed over many years, and as Gary said, yeah, there's quite a lot of them, deemed crofts out there. Alec.
I think the question I asked in Dingwall, this new form was sent out on the 6th of January 2026. Multi-owners of Beerland Crofts never got that form.
That's correct.
And that's, we're sort of stuck on that one.
So on that one, I think Alec, what Alec's referring to is a thing called a vacant croft, and you're the owner of a vacant croft. There are 700 crofts where people are owners of vacant crofts. I think Alec's in that bracket, we established that afterwards. And what's happened is people have bought their croft at some point in the past under the right to buy. Depending on the advice they were given by whoever was acting for them, they either became an owner-occupied crofter or they ended up in this rather weird position being an owner of a vacant croft. For a long time they were referred to as landlords of vacant croft, but we changed that last year because it was obviously confusing, because people were going on to the register of crofts going, oh wait a minute, this guy's got a croft and it's vacant, can I have it? Right? But they're actually there as working as an owner-occupied crofter. So if you're in that position, if you're wondering why you're on a croft, you own it, and you haven't had an annual notice, it's maybe because of that. What's happening is the legislation that Rod referred to earlier, which is going through Parliament at the moment, and will go through its final sitting next Thursday, the 19th, and hopefully be passed. That has provisions to allow people who are owners of vacant crofts to become fully recognised owner-occupiers. It's not our area, it's nothing to do with the Crofting Commission, but it means you'll get better subsidies from other parts of the government. So hopefully that would work. So that's the background to it there, Alec.
I'm not the only one.
You're not the only one. There's another 699 of you. But I think that the important thing from my perspective is that this has been a problem since 1976, when the right to buy came in, depending on how people were advised how to buy their crofts. And they ended up in this rather strange situation. And up until now, nobody's done anything about it. When I picked it up, it was one of the things that both the board and people like yourselves have been saying, we need to get this fixed. So we took the action, we went to the government, we've got it, and it's in the draft legislation, and hopefully it'll be passed. So it's one of these things where actually the Crofting Commission, others like the Federation, NFU, who were in amongst it as well, were all taking it on board, and the government have actually listened and put it into legislation. So it's if it goes through, it'll be a good outcome.
Yeah. I got a question from an acquaintance the other day. A chap who doesn't know much about crofting, but obviously I tried to explain. I suppose you can't explain crofting in more than about 5 hours, can you? But he asked, why do I have to live within 20, or why would you have to live within 20 miles of your croft? And I said, well, obviously it's a duty, and I explained that the outcomes from that would be, hopefully, as I said, protecting fragile communities and stemming rural depopulation. But what I did say to him was, if it was 1955, you had to live within 5 miles of your croft. And in 1886, you had to live on your croft. So if you look at it over time, the rules have become quite relaxed, actually. 20 miles compared with living on your croft is very relaxed. So, as I say, it was just an acquaintance that spoke about crofting the other day, and when I delved into that, it's quite apparent that I don't think 20 miles is a huge ask, actually. Especially in some tight rural communities, you would want to be, and I suppose if you're if you're working your croft properly, you want to be there, don't you? Or within striking distance.
Are exceptions for that 20-mile limit, isn't it? If someone is genuinely working a croft but living 25 miles away, isn't it?
Well, I'll let the man who is going to adhere to the duties, or make you adhere to the duties, I'll let him answer that.
The correct answer is no, there's not. But what you can do is you can apply to the Commission for consent to be absent. And if you're more than 20 miles away, you can be you're treated as absent. And this is the point I was making at the beginning of the wee chat I did there. We've got no option. This is legislation. I'm not making this stuff up. We just have to do what the government says to us. And one of the things we say is that we will listen. Everyone who is in that position can come to us and say, this is my situation, and we'll look at it and on a case-by-case basis and go through it with you, if that's the case. I understand the frustration. I mean, there's people who say to me, I'm 21.5 miles away, and you're saying I'm breaking the law, and I'm saying, yeah, because that's what the legislation says, and we've got no way out. But come and speak to us, and we'll come and we'll look at your circumstances, and we'll work it out from there. That's all I can say. I would also say that anything in the Crofting legislation that people don't like, and I mean, people come to me all the time and go, this is ridiculous. And true enough, I mean, the grazing regulations and laws is pretty much the same as it was in 1891. So you can imagine that things have moved on maybe a wee bit. And I say, well, if you don't like it, speak to your elected representatives, speak to your MSPs, because they're the ones that can change it. They're the ones that have the power to do it. So.
I know someone gave this. I think it's come to some kind of accommodation with yourselves on this issue.
Yeah, I presume so. Yeah.
That's good to hear, actually. And also, as Gary said, your MSPs or your MPs, but also some of the lobby groups like the NFU, SCF. If you want something or you don't think something's right in crofting law, speak to them, because they have the ear of the government. And I believe they are quite vociferous in some of their submissions. So they would be the ones to speak to. Any more?
I don't want to hog this point, but we sold that land in 1974. Who is liable to do the decrofting, us or the buyer?
Is it not decrofted?
Aye. The buyer, we sold so many hectares for housing sites. Then he developed the sites. Were we liable to the decrofting, or was he liable to do the decrofting?
I don't know. But of course, I suppose it brings you on to another subject. And I suppose it arises where somebody buys a croft and can't raise capital, can't raise finance on it. And it would be quite, and I haven't given advice to people over the years, but if somebody wants to raise capital, go and decroft. If you have a bare land croft and you can, apply to decroft your house site and garden ground. I think from what I said there, I think last year was it 126 house sites and garden grounds were applied for and one was refused. So you decroft it and automatically you've got something you can go to a financial institution with, or a bank, wherever you go, building society, and say, I've got a piece of land, it's not decrofted, I want to build a house, and they're going to start speaking to you. If it is croft land, obviously nobody's going to, or very few organisations will look at you if it's crofted. So to answer your question, Alec, I don't know who would be responsible for that at all, but if you're
working at it.
Yes.
How long does an assignation take now? Is it 7 weeks, you said?
Gary? On average, right? Make it very clear. It depends again on the on the specific circumstances. But on average, it's taken 7 weeks. Some are going through much more quickly. What?
It was 2 years waiting, and we lost the documents from the commission. When I found it late, it was going from desk to desk. I was on the phone on hold. Wasn't really a nice sort of thing. Only 2 years to get a croft in the name. There was important documents lost as well.
Has it been resolved?
It's been resolved, like, but I just thought
Yeah.
there, it's absolute that it's going to 7 weeks. It was 2 years right away.
So I'll pick it up with you.
Yes,
Yeah.
It was pretty, you know, the whole phoning people. It was I would say it was a great experience. It's all now, like, but I just want to say that street that set the weeks, 3 years was a fair wait.
There was a period, just to give a bit of context, and I'm sorry that happened, and I'll pick it up with you if afterwards, if there's anything we can learn from it, very much so. But what happened with, just to give you a bit of a history lesson, so the Crofting Commission was in existence from 1886 to 1911, and then it was disbanded because they didn't think they needed it. After the war, with mechanisation and such like, and farms and landholdings becoming much bigger, the Crofters were saying, wait a minute, we're not getting, our way of life isn't being represented. So it's a thing called the Taylor Commission looked at it and did a bit of work in 1954, and the Crofting Commission was reinstated in 1955, and that's when Rod was alluding to all the different things of how far away you could live from your croft. The Crofting Commission, as many of you will know, gave out grants and subsidies and such like through to 2012, and then it was changed, and a very, very subtle but distinct change to now with the Crofting Commission. So we're not in place to represent crofters. We're here and in place, and it's the board as well. That's the point that Rod was making there. We can't give advice here because we're here as a government regulator to regulate the system of crofting on behalf of the people of Scotland. We're not here to represent the crofters, and it's a very distinct thing. But the problem is, and this is where the gentleman here has run into it, when they changed that, it changed an awful lot of the work that the Commission had to do, because we moved from being assisting folk to being a full-blown government regulator, and they simply didn't resource it enough. I mean, at the time when they put the legislation through, even then the staff were saying, 13, 14 years ago, there wasn't enough staff, and that remained the position through to 2022. There was a lot of issues after COVID and such like, and people leaving, that led to the situation that you unfortunately found yourself in, where it was taking a long, long time, and moving from desk to desk because it was maybe new people looking at it, someone had left, all the things that went wrong with it. But the nub of it was that the Commission didn't have enough resources. And there was a piece of work done, there was the government audit, people looked at it, they accepted this, a piece of work was done, and the Crofting Commission resources were increased in 2022-23, and new staff have come in, and that's one of the reasons why it's much more efficient now. So I would hope that nobody's in the same position as yourself. And just to give some statistics and hope to anyone else that is putting in an application for an assignation or anything else, when I started, as I say, just over 2 years ago, in terms of things that have been sitting around, like the one you're talking about, there was 144 cases that were sitting that were more than a year. The longest one, and that was in 2024, the longest one had been sitting since 2017. It was 7 years. Yeah, I mean, I was just like, nah, guys, we've got to fix this. We put into a thing, I called it CSI Crofting. They weren't very happy, but we sat down every Thursday afternoon, and I said, bring me the two oldest cases every Thursday afternoon. Get the senior management were there, and the caseworker who was in charge of it come into a meeting every day, and I said, what are you going to do to fix this? As of last week, there was 29 cases over a year, and those all have very specific issues. And are being resolved, but the important thing is the applicant knows about it. So the thing where you were found, you're going from place to place, person to person, and getting very, very frustrated, understandably, that isn't happening now. The folk all know why the thing is stuck. And the one piece of advice I would give, can't advise people what to do, I can't advise people what to put in their application forms, but please make sure every bit of information you've been asked for has been put in your application. And please make sure, one of the two biggest issues I find in my life every day are maps and boundaries. Get your boundaries established if you don't know where they are. Get them established, especially if there's going to be a potential dispute with a neighbour. Get it sorted. Make sure accesses are sorted properly on and off a croft if you're doing something with it, especially if you're going to decroft a bit. Make sure there's an access onto the existing croft, these kind of things. And to show that, get an accurate map. And if you can't do the map yourself, find someone else that can do it. Because boundaries and maps are the two things that hold things up, and that's the things that come to be. And then the ones that are over a year have very specific legal issues that sometimes run right the way back. That's that then. The other side of it is that, in terms of, I'll say this, talking about the legislation, we had a situation, and we talked about this in Dingwall as well. The day of the Dingwall meeting, I was in a meeting with our lawyer, and we were looking at an issue in terms of, it was to do with leasing, and he referenced, the first piece of legislation he referenced was the 1444 Leasing Act, which is still in existence. He then looked at the 1691 Commonties Act, and this was to do with common grazings and people having access to common grazings, and then the 1886 Act and all the acts that came through it. So sometimes when we're looking at stuff, if people are wondering why we're taking so long, we're looking at genuinely ancient legislation. And of course, one of the things that hopefully with this new act that's going through, fingers crossed, next week, that will solve a lot of these problems and sort it out, make things even more efficient.
Another thing is, see if you're putting a shed in for an agricultural building on a croft, and you're only going to get 25,000. That won't cover the costs.
Well,
Nothing to do with us.
we can't speak about that because CAGS is not under our jurisdiction. But it's something, as Gary said earlier, it's something you should take up with NFU, SCF. Well, I know he's sitting there, but he's like us. He has to do what the law tells us. So I think if and I can't agree or disagree, but what you should do is speak to your MSP. And we all know we're facing huge price rises. You know, we're fuel, materials, everything. So it would be a legitimate ask, I would say, and that's as much as I can say.
I think it's a legitimate ask, but realistically, as a crofter, you know, and assistance of 25,000, if you spoke to your farmer neighbour and said, I'm going to get 25,000 towards this shed, they'd be thinking, is that a fact? I'll have to do this off my own bat.
Yeah.
If I want to, you know, develop and improve. So there's two sides to it, I think, that yes, and certainly post-COVID prices are just, look, everything's dearer, and the grant hasn't moved. But that said, 25,000 is an awful lot better than nothing.
Yeah.
Way back when we put the shed there 25 years ago, 25,000 was a lot of money then compared to what it's worth today. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
But Jeff, as a crofter, I can say that absolutely I'll accord with exactly what Jeff has said. And the CAGS grant is totally for crofters. It's not competitive in that as long as you meet the criteria, you'll probably get it. But it's not competitive like the last FFIS. It was very competitive and lots of folk went for it and very few crofters got it. But it's totally dedicated to crofting, and that's something that, as I said earlier, it all lands in the same picture, and that's why we have to promote that crofting is vibrant, it's promoting it's enhancing rural population. We have to make sure of that, because in one picture, Scottish Government could look at it and say, oh, crofting's not working at all, so we're going to cut this, we're going to cut that. And that's why, because of our work and duties, we've got to show that crofts are being used, they're being purposefully used, they're being lived on, and that will all add into the same picture. So I think it's really, really important that we show that crofting is alive and it's making a contribution. Because public finances will get tighter. I think that's widely accepted. Yes, sir.
The 25% who didn't fill in the return last year, what's happened to those 25%?
The 25%?
The ones that haven't done it last year, did you eventually get them trickling in?
No, we didn't.
Just never got them?
No. So what I'll say is we're starting from a very much a zero base here. We haven't done this before. These kind of meetings, this kind of media campaign, the push to get the 25%. We must expose this 25%. And we know fine, there'll be some of the 25% will be people who don't want to be found out because they're not residing in their crofts. Some people have just been negligent and put it to the bottom of the heap. It's not been done because they didn't think it was important. So I would think, and as a crofter, I would think most crofters are pretty honest. They want to put something back, but it has never been highlighted before. So for us to start at such a zero base, this is going to have to, it's going to have to be a consistent and a continuous approach by the Commission. And it's not 1, 2, 3 years, it's going to be quite a number of years before we get that, to uncover that 25%. Gary, do you want to say anything in addition?
We wrote to every one of them, because we had the addresses obviously, and we basically said, you haven't filled this thing in, and it's a legal requirement. We won't do anything this year, but if you don't do it next year, we'll probably take action. Could you please do it? And what Rod said, what we're looking for, we want to clear up very quickly the folk who just weren't bothering and thought, oh, that's just another bit of paper from the government, I'll ignore it. And there was quite a number, a few people have said that, they just ignored it. So that's fine, they're coming in now. And I don't know the numbers at the minute because the current notice period runs till the 6th of April. It's just under a month to go, and then we'll do a mop-up at that. But the general consensus at the moment is that if somebody hasn't filled it in after people who have in the past, plus the 25% we wrote to again, everyone's been either filled it in or been contacted. If they are not filling it in this time round, like I said earlier on, we can only assume that colleagues here as to what level in depth the Crofting Commission does with the limited resources we've got, and then we do that. And I think it's only good, and like I said a minute ago, that everywhere I was asked, what are you doing about it? There's, everyone's saying, oh, there's that croft up the road and nobody's been on it for 40 years and all the rest of it. What are you doing about it? This is what we're doing about it.
Touch on a point, Ron, that you made earlier, cultural change.
Yeah.
We go about the Crofting communities doing their job, and we see people doing a good job, trying their best. But 2 crofts down, Croft, none happening, becoming wilderness, and I want to say this without being disrespectful to anyone, but there are folk who are just holding on and not letting go because it's their croft. And there are different countries that have a totally different cultural approach. They accept, come a certain age, that it would be good if someone younger and more proactive, with a bit more zeal and energy, had this land and was working with it. Yeah. And I just want to ask, has there been any thought or energies, resource directed towards looking to see what could be done to encourage that cultural change from the Commission side?
Okay, well, from the Commission, no, but from myself, I sit on a Scottish Government board, I suppose it is, or a group, which is called FONE, Farming Opportunities for New Entrants. Now, it started off as farming opportunities, but they soon realised there was a lot of people wanted crofts. So, I suppose, how do you explain it? I totally get what you say, Jeff, and I totally agree. The cultural change is probably going to take a generation, I would have thought, maybe 2. But the number of people that want crofts numbers 700 or 800, and there are only 700 or 800 seekers of crofts and 3 offerers of crofts through the Scottish Land Matching Service. So the FONE group, Farming Opportunities for New Entrants, what we're trying to do now is to pull out public landowners who have unused land and offer it out to maybe croftland, but certainly farmland. But croftland is becoming more of a focus because a lot of these landowners, public landowners, actually don't know. They might have croftland there that they could make available to younger people. So maybe to start the cultural change starts with your employers, our funders. Scottish Government are huge landowners, Scottish ministers, And they have embarked upon a scheme where they are trying to seek out the crofts that are not being used, not being lived on. And I don't know, I asked, I think the next meeting's in April, I asked for an update of that. So I think if you get somebody like Scottish Government, Scottish ministers, who are the exemplars perhaps, and say this is what we're doing, and it can be promoted, I think you might get more people offering crofts up. The other thing, and again we can't comment on it, we can't promote sales of crofts or sales of assignations, but some people who are sitting on crofts, now if Gary gets his way and we enact section 26 of the Crofting Acts, when it reaches a certain stage we can't stop it, and that croft will come off somebody with no compensation if it's found that the duties aren't being adhered to. But what I would say to somebody is they're probably sitting on an asset. So rather than sit on it, that croft is worth something to assign to somebody, whether it's a neighbour or it's somebody who wants to come and live in the community. So that needs a cultural change as well. And of course, our fellow board member in the Western Isles, Ian McKeever, I believe Western Isles Council now are looking at crofts and the value thereof for care home fees. So, you know, people are looking at that, and to change that culture to somebody, and here, there's a croft up the road from me, and just to tell the story, I walk up round the road about the Braes in Bewley, saw the money out in his garden, and I said to him, it's a bonny house, he built a house in the 60s, I would say, and the old croft house, as happens, was left derelict. I think he keeps a few fence posts in it and paints the corrugated iron roof every now and again. And I just said to him casually, half jokingly, I said to him, would you ever think of selling the house and the croft? My gosh, no, he says, this croft's been in the family since Culloden. But he's doing nothing with it. So, here, changing a culture is really, really difficult. And as I say, it'll probably take 2 generations to do so. But without doing something, it'll never change. We've got to start somewhere. And I think it was very encouraging, as I say, through phone, I haven't got the answers yet, but I do think Scottish ministers, I know they're doing something, but I would like to see it promoted. I would like to see it in the press, perhaps. So through my involvement with phone, I think we can get that promoted. But yes, thanks for the question, and thanks for highlighting it, Jeff. Yeah.
We also, specifically on the succession for people wanting to move on and move on to another generation along the lines of what you've said in terms of what's culturally acceptable in many other countries. Last year we actually wrote to 8,000 crofters and we explained as a regulator what they could do in terms of doing living succession and not waiting until the day they died and be in the position where they've not put it in their will. And all the issues that are then dealt with, and we have with the statutory periods we've got to wait, and if somebody actually has it in their will, we've got to wait 2 years, for example, to do something with the croft. And the croft, people can come to us and say that's been abandoned. And say, well, it's actually going through the statutory process. So there are ways where people can pass it on when they're still alive, and they can get lots of advice on it. I don't want to tell people what to do and how to do because it's not my business, but it's something that can be done. If somebody says, I want to live here, but I can't work the land any longer and my family aren't interested, there's things they can do. They can get information from the Commission as to what they can do next, and there are more people doing it. And also on Rod's point about the Scottish Minister's estate, I mean, for example, your guys, there's a large estate in the Western Isles that they own, and there's 3 crofts up for rent at the moment, which is quite good. The interesting thing is what the Scottish Minister's estates now say, and it's coming back to the purity of crofting in 1886. They're now asking people to sign away their right to buy and sign away their right to assign outside the family, which means that croft, you'll have the use of that croft in perpetuity in your family as long as you want, as long as you adhere to your duties. But the day you don't, you hand it back. If you've done something to improve it, you get compensated by the landlord, and then the landlord hands it back to somebody local, and it moves on through to people who are local and want to use it. It's just that's been lost through the years with right to buy, right to assign outside your family and such like. It's created a market, and that's starting to be pulled back in, and that's the government priorities because they want people living and working on their crofts in the area where they are.
And also, I don't think I'll get shot down for this. Well, I'm sure I will if somebody's only paying £10 a year rent or so many shillings. I think it's a bit in shillings, a lot of the croft rents. But it goes back to something that if you're not paying a lot for something, you'll not really value it. So if you're only paying a few shillings for the rent of your croft, why would you? Nobody's chasing you until now. But if the rents were maybe more of an economic level and it was costing you something to keep your croft every year, you might actually do something about it. It's just like, I suppose it's not a great analogy, but it's like having a second home and paying double council tax. Unless you're going to do something with that house, you'll pay your double council tax and you'll maybe go put it in Airbnb, you'll maybe sell it, you'll maybe do something with it. But I think if croft rents were higher, I think more people would value what they are. If you're using it, it doesn't matter. But if you're living loads of miles away and you're getting a rent review, a rent notice in every year for £1.75 or £10.20, whatever it is, and the landlords too, it's costing them actually to collect their rent. So that's something that could be looked at. And a lot of rent, I know there are landlords creating crofts, as Gary had said, with these restrictions on it: no right to buy, no right to assign outside the family, and they're actually paying hundreds of pounds for rent. And I think that would be part of the cultural change as well. I think that could be fed into it.
And I'm the one that's going to shoot them down, because we as a regulator, the rent is nothing to do with us.
No, you're quite right, but
just to make it clear, because it's
sorry, wearing two hats. Yeah, quite right. Why do the rents are on the register of crofts to be seen?
Oh yes.
Yes, that's where I got it from.
Alex.
To go on from Jeff's, there's a change in culture in Crofting completely in the last 40, 50 years. And I had one or two Crofting federations meetings. I was told, well, sheep and cattle is finishing Crofting. But it doesn't matter what they're doing in younger generation in Crofting, providing there's lights in the glens.
100%.
That's the most important thing.
Yep.
Get folk in there.
What
Let
you've
them
done
do,
it
let them do what they like, as long as there's somebody living there.
I would agree absolutely with what you're saying there, Alec. We need people in rural areas of Scotland, and that's what the Scottish Government is wanting to happen. So let's all help that to happen, I would say.
Has anyone got anything else before we wrap up? We'll be hanging about for a wee while afterwards if you want a cup of tea, and we'll be able to take any questions.
That's quite important actually, but if you have any burning questions just now, speak now or forever hold your peace.
Until you can catch Rod in a corner in a minute.
I didn't park facing out the way, that's the only problem. No?
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll have a cup of tea. I think there's shortbread, there's biscuits there. Thank you very much for coming tonight. I think it's something we're going to do quite regularly. What Gary spoke about there, about succession, succession is something we should maybe promote. It's a very delicate subject, and it always has been. I think it always will be. But I think if it's presented in a sympathetic and a very informative way, I think that could be maybe a subject of a future meeting. But for my part in this area, the East Highlands constituency, my idea would be to have a few regular meetings in areas such as Brora, Dingwall, and some of the more populated Crofting populated areas. So if you are interested, just watch Facebook, watch the local store for posters or whatever. But yeah, that's my intention anyway. So thank you very much, and we'll have a cup of tea and a chat afterwards if you can wait. Thank you.
Thank you.